May sighed with relief as she lowered her weary body to the side of the bed. Slowly, feeling every muscle and joint in her body protest, she shuffled herself into position and slid her legs between the sheets. The exhaustion from running after her grandchild all day settled into her bones as she propped up her pillow and leaned against it. Peter, her son, along with his wife and their child Jacob, had been visiting for Christmas. While Peter and his wife had taken a long trip to the nearest city for last-minute Christmas shopping, May had spent the day taking care of Jacob. Living in the remote expanse of the West Australian outback had its perks, but convenience was not one of them. The closest town, a half-hour drive away, offered little in the way of amenities. For any serious shopping, the journey to Mandurah, over 2 hours distant, was the only option. It had been a long day for May, and the solitude of the house offered a quiet contrast to the day's activity. Memories of Christmases past floated to the forefront of her mind as she sat there. She recalled the wonder in her son Peter's eyes as a child when he'd wake to a pillowcase full of gifts from Santa. Those moments felt timeless, etched deeply into her heart. Yet, as she concentrated on the details, her recollections felt oddly disjointed. She could not remember arranging Peter's Christmas presents herself, or anyone else doing it, for that matter. It was a curious gap in an otherwise vivid collection of memories. May's thoughts lingered as she left the bedroom and made her way to the living room. She paused outside the room where Jacob slept. The moonlight filtered through the curtain, illuminating the peaceful rise and fall of his small frame as he lay belly down on the bed that once belonged to his father. The sight filled May's heart with warmth and a bittersweet ache. It was hard to believe how quickly time had passed. In the lounge, the Christmas tree glowed softly, its yellow lights twinkling in a cheerful pattern. The base of the tree was crowded with wrapped gifts, including Jacob's Santa sack, which he had placed there earlier in eager anticipation. May's gaze lingered on the scene, her mind drifting back to her childhood in this very house. The kitchen, the trees, the cats, all fragments of a simpler time now blurred at the edges. Settling onto the couch, she closed her eyes for a moment. Her dreams took her back to the house as it had been decades earlier, filled with warmth and the comforting presence of her parents. In her dreams, she was a young girl again, spinning through the air in her father's arms or watching her mother's deft hands crimp the edges of an apple and rhubarb pie. The memories felt vivid yet distant, tethered to a time long past. When May awoke with a start, the name, Mr. Spindle, was on her lips. The memory of her childhood imaginary friend unfolded in her mind with surprising clarity. He had been a comforting presence during her lonely years in this isolated house. Mr. Spindle, a figure with a giant, friendly face and stick-like limbs, had lived behind the old wood-fired oven. As a child, she had written him letters and slipped them into the stove, and in return, he had left her gifts, gum nuts, scraps of paper bark, even small toys. The memory made her smile, though it also raised questions she had never resolved. Where had the gifts really come from? Had it been her mother, despite her serious demeanor? Or perhaps her father? The thought stirred a strange unease within her. The details felt both familiar and alien, as though she were recalling someone else's memories. The house was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. May glanced at the clock and saw that it was well past midnight. Her tea had grown cold, but she barely noticed. Her mind lingered on the song she had sung as a child, one that now seemed oddly haunting in its simplicity. As she settled back into the couch, drowsiness began to overtake her once more. The quiet was interrupted by a sharp clicking sound. May's heart skipped. She stood, startled, and moved toward the front door, expecting to find Peter and his wife returning. But the yard was empty, shrouded in darkness. She turned back inside, but the clicking sound continued, growing louder and more insistent. Armed with a broom, she ventured toward the source of the noise. It seemed to emanate from the kitchen. The familiar yet unsettling scent of slightly burnt toast filled the air, though the toaster was off, tucked away neatly on the counter. Her gaze shifted toward the old wood-fired oven. A shadow stirred in the narrow gap between the oven and the wall. Something emerged, limbs too long and angular to belong to anything natural. They clicked as they unfolded, joints bending in directions that defied comprehension. May froze, her breath caught in her throat. A faint scent of cinnamon wafted toward her as the figure began to take form. It was Mr. Spindle. The room seemed to hold its breath as May stood rooted to the spot. The impossibility of the moment collided with the vividness of her childhood memories. Mr. Spindle, larger and more menacing than she had ever imagined, smiled at her with a grin that stretched far too wide. The clicking noise grew louder, reverberating through the kitchen. May's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to the floor, unable to move, unable to look away. The lights on the Christmas tree continued to blink cheerfully in the background, an unchanging rhythm against the chaos unfolding before her.